Hi everyone, my name's Matt, and ever since the release of the low-profile GTX 750 around 10 years ago, each new generation of Nvidia cards has given us a low-profile 50 series release, including the 1050, 1650, and even now the 3050, but for the first time to my knowledge, you can now buy a 50 series card that is both half height and single slot in the form of this Yeston RTX 3050. As someone who's been a big fan of these cards over the years, I decided to pick this one up to see whether it's worth it or not. Just taking a look at the box it comes in, you can see this is going to be very small. Opening it up and pulling out the card itself, it kind of amazed me that a graphics card capable of providing a decent gaming experience could come in such a small package. And when talking about raw price to performance, it's no secret that this card at $210 or even a normal size 3050 at $180 is not a very good value for the money and is kind of universally hated, which I'll talk about more in this video, but with its low power draw and extremely small size, it opens up a lot of possibilities for making and upgrading small form factor PCs. For example, one of the budget gaming PC metas people have gone for a number of years now is to take a slimline PC like this Dell Optiplex, slap in a card like a low-profile 1650, and boom, you've got a solid budget gaming PC. With that being said, that's not always possible. Take this newer Dell Optiplex for example that has a Ryzen CPU. If we look at the back, we can see it does in fact have the physical space for a dual slot card, but pulling the top off, we find the travesty that many of these machines have, which is a 16x PCIe slot at the bottom and a 1x slot above it, which makes absolutely no sense to me. This means a dual slot GPU just won't fit, but a single slot card like this 3050 will fit just fine. You can even take something like this M720Q, use an adapter to get a 16x PCIe slot, pop in the 3050, and then you've got one of the smallest gaming PCs possible without breaking the bank. Now this is all fine and dandy, but the questions I wanted to answer were 1. Does this card provide a decent gaming experience and perform as well as a dual slot 3050? 2. Does it thermal throttle or produce an obnoxious amount of noise? And 3. How much performance are you leaving on the table by picking up a 3050 like this one compared to other GPUs at the $200-ish price point? To test this card and make sure we're seeing the max performance it's going to provide, I benchmarked it on a mid-range PC running an AMD Ryzen 5 7500F, 32GB of DDR5 memory with a 550 watt power supply and a case that can provide good airflow. Now, installing this little 3050 into a full-size system like this does feel very silly, but it's what had to be done. Now, something also to note about this card is that it only has 6GB of video memory, which for most games is fine, but will cause problems in some more modern titles. In Borderlands 3 at 1080p high, we see a decent 56 FPS average, which could easily go above 60 by dropping a few of the settings. In Minecraft at default settings and using Iris with sodium and BLS shaders, staring at the horizon produced a 108 FPS average, which is pretty good, and note I'm testing it this way so I can compare other cards the exact same way. Cyberpunk at 1080p with the high preset produces a 58 FPS average, which again is pretty darn close to 60, and Black Myth Wukong at 1080p medium with 100% resolution scaling, I saw a 53 FPS average, which is decent. Monster Hunter Wilds may be too much for this card, as at 1080p medium I saw a 44 FPS average with frequent drops into the low 30s. In Marvel Rivals, I tested at 1080p medium and saw a 67 FPS average, which looked and felt pretty smooth. Finally, in Fortnite at 1080p in performance mode with epic view distance and high textures, I tested on the endgame benchmark map and doing so produced a 301 FPS average. Overall, performance is solid. You should be able to play most games with this card at 1080p 60 FPS, and with it being so small, it makes up for these somewhat underwhelming numbers. I also test these games with a half-height dual-slot 3050 to see if there's any performance difference. Well, in Fortnite and Marvel Rivals, these two cards performed almost exactly the same as one another, but in all the other titles, the single-slot 3050 was a bit slower. The larger 3050 gave anywhere from about 4 to 8% more performance depending on the game. So while the larger 3050 is consistently faster, it's not anything major in my opinion. In terms of temps, the dual slot 3050 stayed in the mid 60s to mid 70s most of the time while gaming, peaking out at around 75 degrees, which is solid temps. The single slot 3050 surprisingly stayed in almost the exact same range temp-wise, but did seem to be a few degrees hotter on average. The big difference between these two was noise. The dual slot 3050 was audible but not annoying, and the single slot 3050 was definitely a little annoying if I wasn't wearing headphones, and this is just because the little fan has to work way harder in this card to keep it cool, and I imagine the noise would be even higher in a more air restricted case. So we can see we're not giving up a ton of performance going with a single slot card, but how much performance are we giving up by going with a 3050 versus a full size card around the same price? Well, let's take a look at this RX 6600, which is selling for the exact same price as this Yeston 3050 right now on Amazon. And wow, the performance difference is insane. In Monster Hunter Wilds at 1080p medium, we see 57% higher average FPS on the 6600 over the Yeston 3050. In Cyberpunk 2077 at 1080p high, the difference is a little higher at 59%. In Minecraft, doing the same Horizon looking tests, we see a 61% increase in average FPS. In Black Myth Wukong, we see an increase of 62%, which seems like it should be the peak, but when we look at Borderlands 3, which heavily favors AMD cards, the 6600 produces a massive 93% increase in average FPS, going from 56 to 108. So as you can see, in most GPU limited games, you're going to get around 60% more performance by going with a 6600 over a 3050 6GB, and if you could get an Intel Arc B570 at its $210 MSRP, then the difference would be even higher. For example, in Cyberpunk, the B570 will give you a whopping 117% higher average FPS compared to this Yeston 3050. So this perfectly highlights the fact that unless you need a 3050 for its low power draw or its compact size in a low profile configuration, then buying it makes no sense whatsoever. If your system has PCIe power cables and room for a full-size card, get something like the 6600 or B570 and you will get way more performance for your money. With all that being said, I still kind of love this little 3050. You can slap it into basically any old office system and instantly have a gaming PC capable of playing a ton of games at 1080p with 60 plus FPS. And again, if you want to build an ultra compact gaming PC for something like a home theater emulation system or a gaming PC you can easily travel with, then I think the single slot 3050 is a solid option. It's also pretty good for DIY home theaters, as you could use it for video encoding or even a cloud gaming system while taking up only one slot. All in all, this card is still a 3050 6GB, and compared to full-size GPUs at the same price, it's an awful value, but if you need a super small graphics card and understand the compromises like the lower performance and higher noise, then I can honestly recommend this card, and it already has me thinking of how I could integrate it into a modding project in the future. But I'm interested to hear what you guys think of it. Would you consider picking one up for a compact gaming PC or office PC upgrade, or do you think the performance and compromises are too much in 2025? Make sure to let me know in the comments below. So yeah guys, I think it's time to wrap this video up. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing. And as always, this is Matt from Tech by Matt, signing out.